everyone. It is Mike Levin on Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. And I'm on my way to California with the fam. And we're gonna, see the West Coast. We're gonna see the Pacific Ocean. And we're gonna spend at least one day in Disneyland. And this is a interesting follow-on trip to the very life-changing one of 2018, where my child, having become very interested in YouTube through the, vector of The Odd Ones Out and Jaden Animation. Those were the two main ones. There were a few others. We like Jazza, but really the wholesome, animation crew or gang. They had a word for themselves. And so I got out to VidCon 2018 with my child, and we had a wonderful time. It was a week-long thing. I was there as a single parent, and it's a challenge, She was young and ready to run around and see the sights and enjoy the show, and I was the parent who was very much less clueful about this landscape of people than she was in tow, trying to keep up with her. And they had this wonderful air balloon, what do they call them, bouncy house maze that filled a whole conference room floor. If you can imagine, they were running races, and that is one of our most distinct memories of VidCon 2018, because we only really got to see Jaden and James for a very, very brief photo opportunity window, for which I got those trophy photos. I was a fairly different person then. I have subsequently met, fallen in love with, and married my wife, Natalie, and I knew her only briefly during that first trip. And I always regretted that this was not an experience she could have been along with us for. And I also regretted cutting the whole Disneyland experience short because we had a flight to catch that same day. So today we will at least go from morning to night, a whole solid Disneyland day. I've got that locked in. Whether we get a second or third day or not will have yet to be seen. Times are a little bit different than they used to be. And I nearly did a colossal screw-up by not locking in those Disney tickets, because it's not merely the tickets that you need, like the olden days that you could score pretty easily, even waiting in line. These days, you have to have both the tickets and reservations for that day. There's this sort of double security thing going on, and I should have understood that. I should have known we were in very different times. So when I went to the app and started booking my tickets very late in the process, as I did yesterday, I realized that most days were taken. So I went into, Ticketmaster sniping mode and just sat there until times opened, and I hopped on it, and we have Monday coming up. And so I've got those tickets. It's expensive enough, so a solid day of Disney is probably going to be enough, and will certainly be a memory for a lifetime. And the rest of the time we'll see the sights of the West Coast. I mean, we'll be in Anaheim. It's a beautiful place. And the story, really, of being on that trip this year is that we tried to book VidCon again. VidCon 2021 was supposed to be in Anaheim 2 years following the first. 3 years? 2018, 19, 20, 21. 3 years. Boy, time flies. So the plan always was to do some interesting conference-like thing every year. VidCon was 2018. Comic-Con New York City was 2019. We got that in just in the nick of time. 2020 we skipped, and now in 2021 it was supposed to be VidCon again, because she's even more into that stuff than she was the first time. Her world of YouTubers has expanded. And so I jumped on that, and then they canceled it. And I was like, well, that's a disappointment. We already have our wonderful Airbnb bread and breakfast picked out, which Nat did, and other activities related to it. God bless you. And so I said to the family, I said to my peeps, well, we've got this wonderful location and, venue, the West Coast, seeing the ocean, and it's like tide, some activities and some seals, some interesting things that are, stuff you can do there besides Disneyland. And so we decided to keep that vacation and at least get some time in so we're not rushed for the park. And that's it. That's the background, and that's where we're heading now. I could probably finish the video there, except, I got probably another 15 minutes until my exit. I'm learning the roads around Pennsylvania here again. This was a blind spot. I would have never taken this particular route, 33, which connects the Philadelphia airport, because we're going to the airport, with the Poconos area. That's not a road I would have ever taken growing up. So this is one of the highways that was in my immediate vicinity growing up, which was a blind spot, of which I was not aware, so I am mapping it out. I know the highways up that way. I know good old 611. 611 was interesting because in Lafayette Hill, growing up the way I did, it was an easy enough thing to get up to Route 611. You just take a straight shot up Joshua Road all the way to the town of, I think, Horsham or something. And somewhere up there was a quaint little tavern. It might have been the Broad Axe Tavern or something, but it was also 611 and known to be one of those roundabout long ways to get into the Poconos. And I've done that drive once or twice. I've done it to get to the Poconos from where I live. So where I moved to from New York City, because I was an SEO, a search engine optimizer in New York City, and drew a lot of my self-identity from that. And when all this craziness started happening, I said, well, I got this car, I've got the familiarity with the suburbs, and I probably have a likely work from home opportunity, because like everyone in tech was doing at the time, they were setting themselves up as remote employees, me along with everyone, having done some good practice runs earlier, because my boss was very flexible with me once I moved to Staten Island in order to be near my kid. And so my commute to work became awful. Spiritual, wonderful, but in a time sense awful, because you got all these connections. First you get the Staten Island ferry, which doesn't run as often as like a Manhattan subway. Maybe every 15 minutes in the morning, every half hour if you miss that window. So you get that train and you go to the ferry, and then you take the ferry over to, the southern point of Manhattan, which is kind of the financial district, at which point you'd pick up the subway and you take that subway up to Midtown. And that was my commute. It easily took an hour and a half each way. So that's 3 hours a day commute, even when you live in the borough of New York City to commute to work. It was unsustainable, but I loved my job. I loved where I was at. I loved the work I was doing. In SEO, working for a publisher, it's a dream come true. You don't have to shill yourself out in the agency world, the New York City alphabet soup of marketing holding companies, agency world. I happen to have worked for some of the more interesting ones. I was a very small shop for a while at a place called Flying Point Digital, where in exchange for being at a lower rate than I usually command in the industry, I was allowed to keep all my intellectual product that I produced, and that's where Pipulate came from. And I went through a couple of versions of Pipulate, updating it with the times. It's a little bit behind now, but it's on the verge of a big push forward because I got my SEO kata down again. So the ideas have schismed a little bit because Pipulate was where I kept my SEO kata, such as it were. But that is no longer true. Pipulate has sort of devolved into a simple way to push data in and out of Google spreadsheets, but that's hardly necessary anymore with all the supporting tools out there for doing that with like pandas data frames, whole tabs at a time. So I extracted the OAuth part. The most interesting part was the OAuth authentication, because you could use Google's direct API for spreadsheets. It's not too bad. I used to go through G Sheets all the time. G-Spread, G Sheets. Well, there's a couple of pip install libraries out there that makes manipulating Google Sheets a lot easier, but those date back to a long, long ago time, even before there were formal APIs for Google, and they had GData. GData was their first data API for, I guess, big table-like things. They're like, hey, we have big table back-ending Google Sheets. Why don't we allow people to manipulate data a little bit there? So this was, I don't know, maybe 2013 through 2015, I get the feeling. And so I worked a lot that way. But then the APIs evolved quickly. The need for third-party libraries became less. But Pipulate had this dependency for G-Spread. G-Sheet, G-Spread. So I kept it in there because I didn't want to go reworking everything. But then I was like, oh, really the most interesting bit here is how authentication works, because people don't even need to get their own Google developer, authentication, whatever it is. They just use mine. It's just like an app. Just like if you were to have anything that lets you log into Google on an app on a smartphone, for example, the same embedded, client, secret, and key are there in the app. They're just less accessible. So I take one for the team and I embed the client secret for the app into Pipulate. And then all you have to do is that web-based authentication with a pop-up prompt, and bada boom, bada bing, OAuth, O-H-A-W-F, because OAuth authentication is awful, so I made OAuth. So my attention went there. I neglected Pipulate. The need for Pipulate diminished, but then things changed fairly fast in the SEO field with the arrival of concurrency, fast URL fetching, and the HTTPX library, which I'm using for that. That's really a big change. It's a game changer right now. That all the things we have JavaScript envy for are now suddenly easy in Python, and the ability to grok the async and await keywords, and the event loop being cleaned up in Jupyter Notebook for everyday Jupyter concurrency work, so that you can make use of async and await inside a Jupyter Notebook without a, shall we say, a parent one at that top level notebook level. It's really interesting what they did. There's some monkey patching surely going on with Jupyter Notebook and labs, allowing you as a user to do async and await comfortably inside a notebook and to get the benefits of concurrency. So that got rolled into my SEO kata, along with just, a cleaning up of all the different things that I like to do, a modernization of SERP scraping. I have not gone so far yet in SEO kata as wrapping in the Chrome automation. That is next. But so far, everything I've done can be pulled up under Carnets on the iPhone Jupyter Notebook app. So yeah, you can run Jupyter Notebook on your phone, and yeah, it has most of the traditional data scientist software stack that you would expect from an Anaconda install, namely pandas. So you have Jupyter Notebook with pandas and all that HTTP fetching and all that pip install goodness right there on your phone. It works. And everything I've done in my SEO kata so far works on mobile phones just as easily. Crawling websites onto your phone. I kid you not. And then doing further analyses of these websites and keyword analysis and stuff with everything occurring on your phone. No use of cloud services for that, except insofar as when you connect to services to pull data, which you often can't get away from because you got to pull your data from somewhere. It's not in SEO Kata yet, but it's in some other, even of my public repos right now, connecting to Google Analytics and Google Search Console, emptying out as much of that data as you can for such analysis, using that data as a starting point for crawls, that kind of stuff. It's all just standard stuff. It's stuff you should be able to do as an SEO. Is like, hi, how you doing? And it can be done now easily in a more brief, understandable, and beautiful way than ever before. I make heavy use of the context manager. That's what you see normally as with open something as file handle, colon, and then you indent, and then you can do database connections, file read writes, because that with keyword tells you you're in the context manager, and then when you're in a context manager, it means you have something behind the scene tending to all the annoying busy work details of reading and writing, and usually persistence, database work, even file system stuff. Reading and writing files is database work of a sort. So it's always about the database. When you have with open, it's about a database. And these days, instead of with open, I'm doing with SQL dict. And then as, instead of file handle, it's as DB. And then that DB file handle object to the SQLite database. In all ways, you can treat it like a standard Python dictionary, except it's persistent. It's got to be used within the context manager, so indented under that with SQL dict file name as DB colon indent DB square brackets whatever you want equals whatever data you want to put there. And that's my new way of working. That's like my new framework. Persistent dictionaries in SQL, persistent dictionaries in notebooks is a game changer. Using the SQLite engine as the way to back end that is only just a pleasant favor done to us by the powers that be that decide what standard tools to embed into Pythons. The standard Python that you get when you install Python from, say, Anaconda. If you're using Jupyter Notebooks, that's how you got your Python you're using. Or a Linux system with pip install Python. You probably have to define the Python version these days, pip install Python 3. But more and more you don't have to, because most Linux distros, most desktop Linux distros are shipping with Python pre-installed and Python 3, because 2 point whatever has reached end of life support, so everyone's being forced along to 3. So you probably have some Python 3.6 or greater on your machine, but nonetheless, it's best to be on 3.9, 3.10 as the recording of this video. So you want to get that installed. On Windows, you just open a command prompt and you type Python, and it starts the Windows Store-based install of Python, which will keep itself upgraded because of the Windows Store, app context. A lot patterned off the sandboxes that Chrome with its tabs and iPhone with apps kind of popularized. In a way, Java with a JVM. So everything's about the sandbox these days. That's why apps can't load and save each other's data quite so smoothly as they used to be able to, because those are various security and permission violations. So it's about piping. Apps pipe data, and that's really powerful. It's loosely similar to how Unix and Linux API work. So ironically enough, mobile phones are evolving to have a similar way of things piping data to things that just further testifies to how timeless that original Ken Thompson inspired Unix API really is. It has withheld the test of time and has been used as the model for which other things are often patterned off of. And, you know, that's it. There's a bunch of stuff that I'm really glad I made decisions about 10, it's now maybe pushing 15 years ago, to switch all my work to Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. And so that's about it. That's about all I want to say about that. We're off to our Disney vacation. It's a wonderful time coming up. We're all very excited, and hope to see you soon.